Charles Bonnet Syndrome. I suffer with a condition called Charles Bonnet Syndrome, or visual release hallucinations if you want to get more technical. It's a condition that's far more common than you might realise. It's estimated that as many as half of people with gradual loss of vision will experience one or more bouts over their lifetime. Yet I'm willing to bet that most of you have never heard of it. The reason for that is because most sufferers are scared to tell anybody what we experience. I know I was. My name's Andrew, and I'm 56. 2 years ago, I woke up with awful blurred vision. Every single edge and detail clouded, as if somebody had smeared Vaseline on a camera lens. Well, it never got better. I was scared then and got over to Dr. Harper's surgery as fast as I could, suddenly needing to take a cab rather than climb into the car I'd driven without incident ever since I bought it 3 years before. The doc did some tests, asked me some questions like, "Have you been much thirstier lately? How often do you urinate? How would you describe your tiredness levels?" And then gave me the diagnosis that changed my life forever. Diabetes type 1. He explained that I would need to take insulin shots with every meal, that eating the wrong foods without monitoring my blood sugar could see me drop into a coma, or worse. Then he got to my eyes. "Andrew, your diabetes has resulted in maculopathy. Do you know what that is?" I shook my head dumbly, already reeling with the shock of my diagnosis, and Dr. Harper went on. "It's when the diabetes affects the blood vessels at the back of your eye, blocking them, causing them to leak into the macula, the central part of your retina that helps you perceive colour and fine detail. When these blood vessels leak into the macula, it can cause significant damage." Well, with a lump in my throat, I asked, "Okay, so how do we make this better?" I couldn't see Harper's face properly when he spoke, but his tone of voice was enough to tell me what I'd been dreading. "I'm sorry, Andrew," he replied gravely. "Perhaps if we'd caught this a little sooner, we might have had some treatment options available to us, but I'm afraid it's extensive. We could take steps to arrest the development of the condition, but I'm afraid it's irreversible," he says. Well, I felt as if my world had come crashing down around me. I was still young, still at my physical peak. I was active, playing football and cycling a couple of times a week. And now, my health, my body, and my sight had been taken from me. The first 6 months were tough. I broke up with my girlfriend, a sweet girl called Holly, who tried to make it work but couldn't because I was so damn angry all the time. I lost my job because if there's one thing a machine operator needs, it's his eyes. I even fell out with a lot of my friends, making excuses not to meet with them until they stopped asking. In truth, it was jealousy on my part, envy that they got to keep on living while everything I'd ever hoped for had been snatched away. I pretty much became a recluse. I never left my flat, barely bothering to wash, shave or get dressed every day. I was so sure my life was over I stopped even trying to live it. I was an arsehole. It took me a long time to realise this, but in the end, it was the nurse assigned to visit me at home, a tall, no-nonsense, experienced woman called Lois, who brought this to my attention. "You're an arsehole," she says. "What?" I gasped, shocked at her language. She says, "So you've got diabetes. Do you know how many people do?" She asked then, before waiting for my answer, and continued, "Do you think they all hide in their flats, refusing to get on with their lives? Losing your vision is a terrible thing, and you do have my sympathy, but Andrew, it's no excuse to give up." "But you don't," I argued, trying to defend myself, but she hadn't finished. "Understand? she growled. One of the bravest men I know was paralysed from the neck down when he was just a child, and he hasn't given up. You can do so much more with your life. And you have people that want to help you do that, but you can't even be bothered to shave that ugly fucking beard off, stop being a crybaby, and make a fucking difference. Of course, it didn't happen overnight, and I did argue with her. I was furious at her blunt insensitivity and told her to leave. I said I'd tell her superiors, and she laughed and told me I wouldn't. You won't, because you're a smart guy and you've got too much pride for that, she said. I'll see you next week. Well, that night I shaved. I opened my curtains and actually looked around. Things were blurry, but when I really looked, I could see the things scattered around my home, the mess I'd let it become. So when Lois came back the following week, the place was tidy. I was clean-shaven, dressed. I'd even attempted to comb my hair. She didn't say anything about it, didn't mention the argument the week before, but she took me out for coffee down the road. She guided me along the pavement to the coffee shop, talking to me, reassuring me. It was daunting, even though it was less than a street away, but I felt so proud when I got there. We talked, me and Lois. I think even laughed. Afterwards, she walked me home. Then, when she helped me back inside, she says, "It's nice to meet you at last, Andrew." Well, that day was the beginning of my new life. I moved to a new flat, a ground floor place, and joined a group of other people with visual impairments. I made friends. I could go out every day, even if it was just a short walk, but I made a point of seeing what I could see of the world. I bought what I could, but the Sawyers, the old couple that ran the local store, would bring my groceries once a week. Clark's a gruff old coot, so he refused to coddle me, and he's told me that he respects me for being like I am, for maintaining my independence, for not giving up. From a guy like him, that's one of the sweetest things I ever heard. So, well, things were going well, and then, 1 year ago, it started. I walked into my living room, mug of coffee in hand, and I saw a Victorian funeral carriage stood right there on my rug, complete with 2 huge, proud horses in full livery, adorned with long black plumes in their bridles. They stood perfectly still, while the driver, a small bearded man in period costume and a top hat, fidgeted with the reins and peered at me expectantly. Bizarrely, they were far clearer than the usual blurry shapes I could see. I damn near pissed myself. I dropped a cup, spilling scalding hot coffee over my bare feet, jumping backwards with a cry of pain and alarm. When I returned my attention to the horses and carriage back in the room, they was gone. Well, in that moment, I wondered if I was going mad. Apparently, most of us do, which is understandable. How would you feel if you'd seen that exact same sight in your home? Unless you're Jack the Ripper. I imagine many of you do not have a coach and horses just laying around. Well, I certainly didn't. Well, eventually, after much quiet swearing to myself, and more than a little self-delusion, I managed to convince myself that I had not seen what I thought I'd seen, that it was merely a very vivid daydream. This seemed to work, and I got on with living. Even if I entered that same room a little more cautiously in the days that followed, finally I forgot about it. 2 weeks later, I saw a giant, floating, swirling orange ball in my bathroom. I nearly pissed myself again. I stood staring at it, this bizarre, rotating, levitating globe that was a little larger than a beach ball hanging in mid-air over my bath. Open-mouthed for a full 10 seconds before finally screwing my eyelids tightly closed and whispering to myself, "That is not there. That is not there." After 5 seconds, I opened my eyes again. Guess what? It wasn't there. Have you ever had cause to doubt your own sanity? To wonder whether what you perceive is truly there, or if your mind has betrayed you. Honestly, compared to the loss of vision, the prospect of losing my wits was so much more terrifying. I'd fought against adversity and took pride in the fact that I'm not just a survivor, I'm somebody who's living his own life. How could I do that if I was insane? I barely slept that night and I remained jumpy for days afterwards. Any sign of movement or any unfamiliar shape would set my pulse racing, would cause me to doubt whether it was truly there. It was the toughest time I'd ever been through, worse even than that time after I was diagnosed with diabetes. At least when Dr. Harper had told me about diabetes, I had a definitive prognosis. I was given facts by a medical professional. My affliction was physical, it had a name, and most important, it had a treatment plan. This was something else. My own mind had turned against me. My senses and perception of reality had become twisted and unreliable. It's only when you're in that position that you realise just how terrifying it is. Your senses and the way in which your brain interprets them are your only true defences against danger. You perceive danger, you avoid it, preventing your body from becoming harmed. But what happens when you can't trust your perception to alert you to dangers that are truly there? Lois picked up the first problem, noticing my skittish manner. She asked me what was wrong, if I needed to talk about anything, but I told her no, I was fine, but I hadn't been sleeping well. Well, that last part was true. I hadn't been able to sleep a wink. Just the very thought of being institutionalised, spending the rest of my days a sedated, blue pyjama-clad zombie in a white room with only the echoing cries of my fellow inmates for company, terrified me beyond measure. But what was the alternative? Live life as a risk to myself and others? Ultimately, I chose to ignore it. I reasoned that if I was able to function around these other people without them realising what was going on, that's good enough. A full month passed before the next incident, and I really didn't think that maybe I'd put this whole mess behind me. With every passing day, my confidence had grown. So that Wednesday morning, I'd stepped out onto the sunny street feeling pretty carefree. Each Wednesday, I'd treat myself to a latte down at Joe's, the same coffee shop I'd been with Lois. It was a custom that gave me a great deal of pleasure, one that had seen me forge friendships with other regulars as well as the staff, including Joe himself. As I made my way down the street, white stick in hand, I glanced about me, taking in the colours and shapes of the world around me. I enjoyed the feel of the sun on my face and the sounds of the birds singing. It was a good day. Then I saw them. A party of pilgrims, 6 of them, all dressed in settler-era attire, sitting cross-legged on the asphalt. They didn't look at me, instead they were engaged in an heated yet strangely silent conversation. I froze, staring at them. Still, they argued, gesticulating furiously at one another. However, I couldn't hear their angry voices, despite the fact that, judging by their ill temperament, they must be screaming at each other. Paralysed by shock, the white stick fell from me numb fingers, clattering onto the pavement. I turned to leave, desperate to flee from the haunting sight of the colonists in the road. But I was so panicked, in such an hurry, that I stepped on my cane. It rolled underfoot, and before I knew it, I pitched over, tumbling to the hard ground below. I didn't quite break my fall in time, banging my cheek hard on the floor and skinning my palms. I heard a cry from a passer-by, a friendly, concerned woman who rushed to my side. She knelt beside me, helping me up, applying a Kleenex to my throbbing cheek, which she informed me was now bleeding. I tried to tell her I was okay, there was nothing to worry about. But this good Samaritan insisted on driving me to Dr. Harper's office to get my injuries looked at. Now, thinking back, I'm pretty sure she knew my obvious distress was nothing to do with the fall. At the time, I was embarrassed and angry, but now I realise I owe her a debt of gratitude. Without her intervention, I don't know how much longer this would have gone on before I cracked up and ended up in an asylum after breaking down through sheer stress. Andrew, why don't you tell me what happened? Dr. Harper asked, gently dabbing at my cheek with disinfectant. I explained I just lost my balance. No harm done. But I think he saw through my feeble protestations to my underlying agitation. He didn't press, he didn't force the matter. He simply asked what might have caused my clumsiness. Then he asked how I'd been as of late. When I finished mumbling my way through the most non-committal answer I could muster, he placed a gentle, reassuring hand on my shoulder. Andrew, he repeated it gently, why don't you tell me what happened? Well, I burst into tears. I told him how scared I was, how I'd fought so hard for my independence, and now I knew it would be taken from me. He listened patiently and then asked me to tell him why I ever thought that. I paused then, took a deep breath, thought about it. This was the point of no return. But really, what other option did I have? So, with tears running down my cheeks, I told Dr. Harper everything. I told him about the horse and carriage, the orange globe, and the pilgrims. I told him how I'd been living each day in fear, how I was terrified I was losing my mind. Dr. Harper thought for a while, then he says, Andrew, I don't think you are losing your mind. Well, the sense of relief at that moment was so powerful it overwhelmed me, rendering me speechless. You say that even though you've seen these things, you've never heard any noise from them. Have you detected any odours or experienced any other physical sensations such as touching them? Well, I shook my head, no, and he patted my shoulder once again. Andrew, he says, have you heard of Charles Bonnet Syndrome? Charles Bonnet who? I asked, confused by this sudden unexpected turn in conversation. Okay, let me explain, Dr. Harper said kindly. Charles Bonnet was a Swiss naturalist who was born in the 1700s. He discovered a curious condition in his elderly grandfather, who was almost completely blind due to cataracts. The old man regularly experienced visual hallucinations, including random patterns and even people and places. Sound familiar? Well, yeah, I replied, still confused. Am I suffering dementia? No, Andrew, not at all, Dr. Harper reassured me. Do you know how perception works? In layman's terms, your eyes take in light via the iris and pupil, which is then processed via the retina and translated into electrical signals which are decoded by the brain, which simply organises these signals into a recognisable image. With me so far? Well, I nodded, finally starting to understand. When the retina, he continues, becomes damaged, such as those what have undergone macular degeneration, those signals become warped and jumbled, Dr. Harper went on. The brain still receives them, so it does its job, translating these distorted signals into an image. It kind of fills in the gaps for you. Sometimes it fills these gaps with colours, patterns, creatures, places that aren't really present. And that's called Charles Bonnet Syndrome. Well, I nearly wept with relief. So I'm not mad, I cried. No, not at all, the doctor replied. This is an entirely physical condition. Your mind is in full working order. If you were suffering from any form of mental illness, your delusions wouldn't be limited to just the one sense. You'd hear these interlopers, smell them, even feel them. This is a condition solely related to your eyes, not your brain. As I left Dr. Harper's office, I felt as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Sure, my vision was still an issue, but now I knew it was only a problem with me eyes, not me mind. I knew I could handle the situation. I was ready to face the world again. Since then, I've seen plenty of weird visions. I saw a huge waterfall in the park, complete with an hazy mist and butterflies flitting about it. I saw a Native American warrior, complete with huge feather headdress, sitting at a stall at the counter in a coffee shop. I saw an intricate and quite impossible structure of scaffolding crisscrossing the entire front of my flat. One night last year, I even saw a great swooping green dragon in the sky, twisting and cavorting through the air overhead. All looked utterly and completely real. Yet now I knew they were just simply tricks of the eye. They were no longer disturbing. In fact, I actually came to quite enjoy them, even looking at them as unique and entertaining little shows or works of art that existed purely for my pleasure and nobody else's. I came to welcome them. Then, a month ago, I saw her. It was night time. Well, it was always night time when I see her, and I was just getting ready for bed. I walked into the kitchen to get myself a glass of water and actually cried out in alarm when I spotted a figure in the corner. She was tall, by far the tallest woman I'd ever seen, and even though she stood hunched, she still had at least 6 inches on me. I mean, I was used to seeing characters in dated and bizarre dress, but this was different somehow. It didn't seem like an outfit from any one time, instead a bizarre mishmash of items. Dinner jacket, figure hugging and black, tailored to the female body shape, over a dirty old ruffled dress shirt. To complete the ensemble, she wore a bright red bow tie. On her hands, which she held out to either side as if shrugging or maybe feeling for rain, she wore dirty white gloves. Her fingers were disproportionately long, almost spidery, and occasionally they twitched like she longed to grip and squeeze something in them. On her lower half she wore shorts, the same crimson as her bow tie over opaque black nylons. Her legs were long, lithe, attractive, if the truth be told, the legs of a dancer. She also wore red heels, the same hue as her shorts and bow tie. But they sparkled and shimmered, bringing to mind Judy Garland's ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz. As strange as this ensemble was, I couldn't tear my eyes from her face. Most of it was obscured by a jaunty bowler hat, tipped and tilted to hide her eyes and nose. But beneath the brim of her hat, I could see the deathly pale skin of her face and a grin that sent shivers down my spine. It was wide, too wide, with entirely too many teeth. A smile is meant to be an expression of warmth. It's meant to feel welcoming and benevolent, but the look on this woman's face oozed malice. It felt much like the sort of glee I'd expect from a snake as it corners a rat. However, the thing that startled me most was that she had a third arm sprouting from her back, curled up and over her head like a scorpion's tail. It was longer than any arm should be, and the hand only had 3 fingers like a claw. It was pointed straight at me, and as I swore in dismay and stumbled sideways, it seemed to track my movement. I stood staring at the creepy figure for a few seconds, trying to get my head around the situation. She just stood there in a corner, grinning. Finally, I realised that this was just another of my hallucinations and breathed an audible sigh of relief. One of the tricks I picked up over the months of suffering with Bonnet Syndrome is to break the line of vision toward whichever stimulus is causing my brain to interpret the images into the hallucination. Think of it like restarting a faulty computer, how refreshing the system debugs it. To this end, I close my eyes and count to 5. Then when I reopen them, the hallucination is gone. So, as I stared at the horrifying malformed figure in my kitchen, I knew that to make the image go away, I simply had to close my eyes. Well, I'll be honest here, when I counted to 5, I hesitated a little before opening my eyes. If I'd opened my eyes and she'd still been stood there smiling that smile at me, I think I might have had an heart attack. Well, she wasn't, and I breathed another long sigh of relief, fetched me glass of water, and went back to bed. The tall woman haunted my thoughts in the days after I saw her. She was different to the other visions I'd had. Somehow she felt more real. It was this agitation that my buddy Jason picked up on when we met for lunch the following Friday. Jason was one of those same friends I tried to drive away shortly after I lost my vision. Yet he'd refused to give up on me, continuing to be in touch week after week. Good friends are hard to come by, but great friends, the ones who'll be by your side for life, are even rarer. Jason, God bless his kind heart, is one of the latter. "You've got to tell me what's going on," he said as we sat down over pizza. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to brush it off. "You're so distracted," he says. "It's like you're looking for something in here all the time. You've eaten like one slice of pizza in the time it's taken me to eat 4. So I repeat, you've got to tell me what's going on," he says, waving a slice of pizza around for emphasis. "It's nothing," I replied, feeling a little stupid. "I just had an hallucination a couple of nights ago. It really got to me." "I thought you were okay with those now," he asked, putting the pizza slice down. "Well, yeah, I am. I was, but this was different," I replied, resigned to talking about it. "She scared me." "She?" Jason asked, his interest clearly piqued. "Tell me about it." So I did. I described the tall woman and how she'd appeared to me. And I explained that unlike any of my other hallucinations, she felt more real, and that she was the first to feature such a weird and unsettling mutation. Well, sure, I'd seen smaller versions of people in the past, a phenomenon referred to as Lilliputian by medical professionals. But the extra appendage and impossibly distorted face was something I had yet to encounter thus far. I think it was that, combined with the unnerving expectant stance, that had disturbed me the most. "So," Jason says after I finished, "you say she had great legs?" "Oh, shut up, you arsehole," I laughed, throwing my napkin at him. "No, seriously, I get it, man," Jason replied, passing the napkin back to me. "If I walked into a room and a giant mutant was waiting for me, it'd scare the shit out of me too. But you know what caused you to see this? It's like the coachman and the waterfall you saw. It's a condition that you know you have, and it's one you know how to deal with, okay?" "Yeah, I know, I replied. "Thanks, you're right." And I did feel better too, so I smiled at him, took a big bite of my pizza and changed the subject, asking him about his psycho ex, a conversation he was all too happy to dive into. The next time I saw the tall woman, just under a week later, I was brushing my teeth. I was stood at the wash basin, brushing away, when I spotted a figure in a mirror. She was out in the dark hallway, peeking round a door behind me. That same sinister grin I'd seen before stretched her narrow face into a distorted grimace. the dirty bowler hat pushed down over her eyes once again. Each of those 3 long spidery hands gripped the door frame. It felt like she was trying to avoid being spotted. I cried out, spitting toothpaste foam all over the mirror, my toothbrush clattering into the basin. I spun round, my heart thumping in my chest, my breathing ragged in my throat. She wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. The door was empty. I tiptoed forward, hesitantly, trying to look around the door frame, without actually sticking my neck out into its shadowy confines. The seconds ticked by as I drew closer and closer. I couldn't see anything, so finally, with a whisper of self-affirmation, I stepped out of the bathroom. The hallway was empty, as was the rest of my flat. I was shaken again. This was the first time I'd seen an hallucination in a reflection. I wasn't even sure I'd actually seen it. Now, as I sit here writing this, knowing what would follow, I thought like that to try to protect myself, to shield myself from the truth. I was an idiot. A full fortnight passed without incident. Sure, I saw a flash of colour one day, a dancing yellow lightning bolt that zigzagged back and forth on the street outside my flat. But that was exactly the sort of thing I'd come to expect from my condition. It was exciting, otherworldly, but it wasn't scary. Not scary, not like she was. In retrospect, that fortnight was blissful. It was a reminder of what life could be like, the existence I'd carved out for myself since my diagnosis. Life was good. The night that changed the way I viewed the tall woman, last night, I'd been out and had a couple of drinks. I'd met the other guys with visual impairment for dinner, and we'd ended up at a bar afterwards. I wasn't hammered, but we got through plenty of beer between us. By the time I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt decidedly light-headed. It took me a while to make it home, laughing and talking to a couple of the other guys from our group as we strolled along. It had been a great evening. It's probably the last truly good one I'll ever have. Well, I bid the other guys good night, and I'm fumbling with me key, and I let myself in. With swaying steps, I strolled into my hallway, slamming the door a little too loudly behind me. I took off my jacket, hung it on the hook by the door, then hit the light switch. She was waiting at the end of the hallway, all 3 hands held aloft into claws, reaching for me, that same maddening, malevolent grin on her pale face. I swore again, louder than ever, actually jumping back a step, recoiling from the impossibly tall and terrifying figure lying in wait in my own home. The tall woman didn't move. She just stood there, staring, smiling at me. I stared back, but I sure as hell didn't smile. Jesus Christ, I muttered under my breath. You know how you can feel a little paranoid after a few beers? That feeling of non-specific post-alcohol dread? Imagine that combined with a giant grinning mutant woman suddenly appearing in your home. Suffice it to say, it was very, very, very worrying. I don't need this, I sighed, closed my eyes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, when I opened my eyes, her face was just a foot from my own, grinning wider than ever. She dashed the length of the hallway and was now stood so close that her long, grasping arms were either side of me, her fingers twitching and clawing at the air around my face. I could see her chest heaving, as if she were actually laughing silently at my attempts to dismiss her as if the thought that I could ever be free of her was amusing. I screamed, a full-bodied shriek of terror, and actually dropped to my knees, covering my head as if to fend off an unexpected blow. It never came. Finally, I lowered my hands, gasping for breath, shaking. The hallway was empty, the tall woman nowhere to be seen. I stayed there on my knees for a moment, gasping for breath. Then I was on my feet, and I turned and ran out of the flat, out of the building, and into the street. Well, I stood there shivering, terrified beyond reason, without a clue as to what I'd do next. Well, finally, I pulled my phone from my pocket and made a phone call. "Hey, Andy, what's up?" Jason asked. "Jason, I need you to come here," I said, sobbing. Jason didn't ask why I didn't complain. Instead, he simply replied, "I'm on my way." Less than 20 minutes later, his car pulled up outside and he dashed over to the steps outside my building where I was sitting, shivering. He threw his jacket round my shoulders and asked what happened, his voice filled with concern. She is in there," I stammered. "The tall woman, she's back." Okay, he says, gently helping me to my feet. "Come on, let's go in there, check it out." I wish I could say that I was brave when we goes inside, but I'd be lying. I cowered behind Jason, one hand on his shoulder as he made our way through my flat. Of course, we didn't find a thing. We're talking a giant mutant lady in a poky little one-bed flat. Where the hell was she going to hide? Finally, after we checked every single room twice, I had to admit she was gone. "I'm so sorry," I apologised, feeling genuinely stupid. "I got scared and I'm sorry, mate." Forget about it, mate," Jason says. "So I'm here now. Where do you keep your booze?" Half a bottle of bourbon later, we were both feeling pretty talkative. "She's, just kind of different, I tried to explain. I get it, he said. "It's like you saw something bad and you feel bad and that's bad." He didn't get it. "No, she's different, I explained. "I've never had a repeat hallucination before, and they've never been scary, She's not like the others." "Mate," Jason says, taking another sip of bourbon, "you've got this Bonnet Syndrome, and that makes you see stuff. So," he waves his hands in the air like a magician who just performed a trick. I know, I replied. "No, listen, Andy," he says. It makes you see shit. It's just your eyes, yeah? You didn't hear anything, you didn't feel anything, and this is how that stuff goes. It's your eyes. And I know it's scary, mate, but you've been through, hell and high water in your life so far. You're tough, one of the toughest, bravest guys I know. You can handle some creepy, hallucinated bitch." I laughed, I couldn't help it. "She is a very creepy hallucination bitch though, mate." He laughed too, and we both had a drink. "That could help," he said finally, his voice thoughtful. "What, drinking?" I asked. "No, well, yeah, it does," he giggled. "I mean, demystifying her. You should give her a name, something stupid so she's not scary. I've got to say that as much as I like creepy hallucination bitch, that's a bit of a mouthful," I laughed. "Yeah, I get that," he replied. Suddenly, something he'd said came back to me. "How about Helen?" I suggested. "Helen Water." "Awesome," he says, then raised his glass. "Here's to Ellen, buddy." "Ellen," I smiled and drained my glass. Well, Jason spent the night on my sofa, mainly because he'd had too much to drink to even think about getting behind the wheel of a vehicle, but honestly, I think the reason he drank so much was so he'd have an excuse to stay and keep an eye on me. I'm glad he did. Knowing that he was there made me feel safer, and I was able to get some sleep. It gave me a sense of security to know that if the strange vision I'd just christened Ellen was going to appear again, I'd be able to call on him for support. Next morning, we both needed support. "Oh, it feels like a mule kicked me in the head," Jason groaned when I made my way into the living room. "Yeah," I replied, my own head thumping. "Joe's? Coffee?" "Joe's," he replied firmly and staggered to his feet. As we drank a strong black coffee and ate muffins, we didn't talk much. But finally, Jason broke the silence. "So, you feel all right now?" he asked, his mouth still full of blueberry muffin. I nodded. "Yeah, I think so." "Not still freaked out about you-know-who?" he asked. "Ellen?" I replied with a smile. "No, I really don't think I am. I reckon I can handle some creepy hallucination, bitch." "Good." He laughed and gave me a hearty pat on the back. "That's cool, mate. I bet you can." Now, after a night spent cowering in my bathroom, too scared to go out into my flat, I knew we were both wrong about everything. Remember how earlier I told you that the thought of being institutionalized, that the very idea of losing my grasp on reality was the most terrifying thing I could imagine? Now, I'd welcome that, because the alternative is far, far worse. After breakfast, I said goodbye to Jason and he climbed into his car and drove off. The day passed without incident, and when Lois stopped by this afternoon, she even commented on how upbeat I seemed. "You got a lady in your life?" she asked casually. I laughed at that, wondering what she'd think if she knew the truth. "Well, yeah," I chuckled, something like that. "Good for you," she sniffed. "You make sure you treat her right." Well, that tickled me even more. I had to bite my lip. "Sure," I replied, "I'll do my best." Tonight, still a little wiped from the exertions of the previous evening, I decided to turn in early. I brushed my teeth, washed my hands and face, got changed. Finally, I fetched a glass of water and walked into the bedroom. I climbed into bed and instantly felt so relaxed. Within mere seconds, I was ready for sleep. That sudden, overwhelming drowsiness that comes when you've spent a whole day keeping sleep at bay. I decided that resistance was futile, and I sat up to switch off the light. I nearly didn't see her, but as I reached for the switch, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. My heart leapt into my throat as I turned to the foot of my bed. The tall woman was crouching there, her grinning face staring at me from just beyond my feet. So many teeth. Her long, slender fingers spread out over my blankets, twitching slightly as she gripped the end of the bed, slowly, excruciatingly so. Her third misshapen arm came into view over her shoulder, joining her other hands on my bedding. I froze, utterly petrified. I was at a crossroads here, arriving at a pivotal moment that had been coming for some time. She watched me, grinning, as if she was waiting to see what I'd do. Cruel amusement flickering across her pale face, but this time I'd had enough. "You don't scare me anymore," I said, my voice filled with defiance and anger. "I'm not letting you do this to me." I reached across to the light switch. "Good night, Ellen," I said triumphantly, and then flicked it, plunging the room into darkness. I laid there, a sense of tremendous pride surging through me, and I grinned to myself in my warm, comfortable bed, overjoyed at the emotional victory of overcoming my own fear. And then it happened. The thing that led me here, something that turned my blood to ice water and my bowels to jelly. Good night, Andrew. Her rasping voice hissed from the darkness.